Hello and welcome back to Forever Rugby here on Forever Sports. My name is Reza. I am kindly joined today by my good friend Ruz. Welcome Ruz, and how are you doing today?
Awesome, my brother. It's a little bit more relieving knowing that the Springboks are going with a bit of continuity. The semi-finals is coming up, so compared to last week, the nervous anticipation and excitement, I guess we've eradicated the anxiety. It's just excitement for this week. Obviously not undermining England, but that France game was the banana peel we really needed to get over, yeah?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And of course, if you haven't already heard the news, we come out today with a continued side from that France quarterfinal, completely unchanged. Those players have been rewarded with another game in the playoffs. And of course, we already see some comments here on the channel. We thank you very much for joining us today. If you have some thoughts on what you're seeing out of this team, whether you think it's a good choice, whether there are any changes that you would have liked to have seen, please do drop them in the comments and let's have a little bit of a discussion about it. We will be joined a little later by a couple more of our panelists and we can have a fantastic time here today. I see, of course, we see everyone is changed. Ricky Lowe, yes, indeed they are. Brandon van der Merwe says, saw it, now I'm surprised. Brendan van der Merwe, please let us know why are you surprised? And George Crayland says, I think it's the first time ever Rassie and Jacques named an unchanged 23. That is possibly very true. I can't remember the last time, Roots, that we saw a completely unchanged 23 from top to bottom.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, there's a sense of calmness on my side with the unchanged team. I just think coming towards the real crunch time of the knockouts, Rassie and them have been building up a squad of players throughout the 33 that chosen for the World Cup to get involved and contribute. But remember, off the field, those who are not involved are just as important. I take into consideration the guys, the non-playing 23 against France were actually sort of ordered to be the French, and they were being attacked and harassed by the South Africans in training. So everyone has a contribution, but in as far as an unchanged team, I think it's the right call. You don't want to unsettle that rhythm, and coming out of that game, which was absolutely sensational, to overcome all the hostilities, the French bombarding us, it is definitely a relief to have this team unchanged, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. You say relief, but I suppose one of the biggest talking points for me and the guys in the comments as well, please do let me know, but I think that game was so hard against the French. It was physically demanding to the extent, and I know, of course, we reward these players for their ability in that game and to get over the line, but is there perhaps also not some concern that there might be some fatigue over that semi-final? I mean, many of these boys we'd like to see in a final. Is it a question of, look, let's just get into the final and we can worry about it? Or perhaps there's some room for some game management? As I add, Dan, hi Dan, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
Yeah, very, very good. Sorry, this is a common thread. I just need to give myself some time to look at the lineup before, making just.
You don't worry. I've just asked Roots in a nutshell whether or not he feels that there's perhaps some room for some rotation in this box squad, which is completely unchanged given the hard game that they've just come out of. So, Roots, I'll let you answer that for us.
I think for the most part, what we potentially could see is the likes of a Dwayne Vermeulen coming off and Kwagga Smith getting introduced. In terms of the player attrition rate, we've been blessed in that, yes, the players, I mean, you take a look at Etzebeth, Jesse Creel after the French game, they were battered and bruised, but in terms of their ability to recover, and also I think if you take into consideration the stats of the amount of time the South Africans have played as opposed to the other teams, we've been managed pretty well. So I think that all comes together with Rassie and Jacques and the rest of the coaching and management team to have managed the players enough that they'll still have some gas in the tank for the semi-final. So this is not just the ad hoc, let's keep the rhythm. This is part of the plan all along, in my opinion.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have to see. And on that note, guys, I'd just like to point out that tonight we have a very, very special fan forum. If you haven't already joined us for one before, it is a full discussion panel on everything rugby, a review of the last weekend's game, a preview of this weekend's game. And tonight we are very blessed to be joined by a guest in Pamela Watts, who is the head of medical at the Lions. She will be taking a bunch of our queries, she'll be engaging with the chat, and she will just be having some fun with us, just a little bit of rugby talk. So if you have questions, especially along these lines, where questions about rotation policy, how they manage these injuries that have happened to all these players, this is your time to come and join us tonight. The show starts at 7 o'clock, and pose these questions to her because she is, of course, the expert in that field. Dan, I'll hand you your first question here. I see a comment here from Frank van der Merwe says, still no Trevor Nyakane. Kitsoff has been a massive disappointment for me. Conceded too many penalties against France. And then, of course, I feel you could put Esterhazen in ahead of Damien and you don't lose anything. Let's focus on that first part, that front row. Frank obviously has some issues there with Stephen Kitsoff, and also no Trevor Nyakane, which for me, that Trevor Nyakane call is probably the bigger call. Vincent Koch retains his place on the bench. What's your thoughts on that?
I think what we saw from the Spicy Plum Kitsoff last week was pretty uncharacteristic. I can't remember a game where he conceded so many penalties. I felt like his scrum was okay. It wasn't, to the best of his abilities, but I don't think his scrum has been, let's say, at its heights, the whole World Cup, but it was more the stuff in and around the park that he was getting blown up for, and he was really almost trying to make up for, one went wrong, and then he was trying to make up for it, and lots of real silly mistakes. And one of the big calls that a lot of the French players were, or fans were frustrated with, was that knock on, and they thought it could have been a penalty and even a potential yellow card. And again, very uncharacteristic. I can't think of another time where he did that. I think, again, the Springboks I think they value this experience. There's a reason why, even despite Andreas Esterhazen maybe being in the form of his life, Deolindy's still playing. And also, just to touch on the Deolindy part, I think Deolindy's also playing incredibly well. He's been also insane this World Cup. He's had a really good World Cup. Like both France and Ireland, the two biggest games, he has been an outstanding performer. I think it's really tough for Trevor. More of a surprise because we've never really seen that rotation. And Trevor's been one of those who have always come in clutch for us. Just thinking back to the British and Irish Lions series, and he's been really consistent. So it'll be, I think, still tough for him to take. But I mean, they really have shown there's no rotation, and they're going with what they thought their winning formula was potentially in their heads for what was the most difficult game.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm just trying to just correct the little error there. It was the team versus. My apologies. I do have the incorrect heading there. Apologies for that. It does say Springboks versus France. Of course, it is Springboks versus England. I will have that corrected for you in a moment. But if you are here on the channel, apologize for that. When you're rushing out and you've just got the announcement, sometimes errors happen. But I guess it lends itself well to the fact that this is the exact same side that face France. Regardless of that fact, I do apologize for that.
Let's pretend we're playing France.
Yeah, exactly. Come out with that exact same energy. So we, of course, I see Albert van Lingen here, Roots, says that I would have gone 6-2 and rest Dwayne or Sia or even Eben. I see the argument for a 6-2. I certainly see that. I think that in what is predicted to be very wet conditions, that game of attrition up front is probably going to be very important. And we've seen that that kind of ball in hand style of play amongst those forwards often frees up a little bit of room for those backline players. So when they're fresh up forward and they're really bullying those guys, they seem to suck in a lot of that opposition and allow us to really spread out wide. But Roots, one, Do you agree that perhaps a 6-2 might have been the way to go here? And then obviously a very big question coming in. Do you rest Dwayne, Sear, or even Eben?
So to answer your first question, I think they might have obviously toyed around with the idea. Keep in mind, they would have planned for the potential of playing England in the semi-final. So only they would exactly know that. But as far as the 6-2, I would not have rested Sia or Eben. I think they are absolutely crucial to our cause at the moment from a leadership point of view and in terms of their playing ability. The only thing perhaps we could have maybe seen is the likes of a Jasper Visa on the bench as well to perhaps replace Dwayne. But I think for the experience part, this is definitely one of the more experienced teams that we could put out, and experience is going to get us over the line. I just think in terms of Pollard coming back was the big contributing factor to perhaps the 6-2 split breaking up. So they desperately don't want to do without Lebok, because I think our game plan in the first half, obviously France never quite allowed us to, but Lebok has a certain style, and then obviously Pollard and Faf coming off the bench with Willie at the back. I think Willie also plays well with Pollard, so it's also combinations. So the 6-2 might have worked, but in terms of continuity, I think they've done the precise thing with the 5-3 split.
Sorry, I was currently muted there. Dan, another question here coming from Frank van der Merwe, and touching on the point that I'd asked about earlier, is the biggest concern is fatigue. He's not worried about England. He is worried about the final. And the freshest of guys are Kitshoff, Etzebeth, Kriel, Dielendi, Mostert, Khaleesi, Peter Steff, Paul Herber. And it's quite a hard comparison to draw, but one I'll draw anyway. Of course, we saw in 2019 England play New Zealand in that semi-final and possibly have played the game of their lives coming into us. And not to say that the Springboks would have made a difference to the final result, but in and amongst all the issues that English team had in that final, fatigue looked like certainly one of the ones that played a factor. We may have the same situation here, having played one of the hardest games we've ever had against that France team. Is there a case to have rested any of the guys that I mentioned here? It is similar to the question that I posed to Roots. I personally probably would have liked to have seen maybe Jasper get at least possibly a start ahead of Dwayne, at least maybe a 40-minute run out. You never know what happens to these guys in this game, and to have them unavailable for a final possibly, and then to have some of the guys who have not been included, like your Jasper, like your Esterhazen, for instance, and then having to shove them into a final possibly because of injuries. That's where my mindset's going, and possibly my only concern with the starting lineup.
Yeah, I think it's tough. We must remember that a lot of these guys were rested for our final game, which is versus Tonga, and then we had a week, right, to breathe after that. So there was a big amount of time there that some of these guys are 2 weeks off, not all of them, but some of them do before this. And obviously that those 2 weeks don't necessarily, they still are heavily impacted. This week is still very tight, right? Coming off a game like that French game is incredibly tough. I think it's a good likening to that English one. And, you know, just to continue going at it over and over again is not easy. But at the end of the day, I think that's knockout rugby. I think there are some people that potentially could have been, you know, like rotation that wouldn't have seen a drop off in our quality. And as long as that's the case, then people would have been fine with it. Also, I think people must also remember it's still a semi-final. You know, this is no means a rite of passage into the final. We still need a win. But, you know, there could have been maybe some changes, like, you know, giving Trevor a run out to see if, you know, maybe Kitshoff's performance was a result of fatigue. You know, maybe give, as you say, Jasper Wiese a run out, because he's also been, at one point this World Cup, he was the starting 8. We barely used Willie in the last game, and when he came on, he unfortunately wasn't great. So maybe, going with that 6-2 in the wet conditions. But the book camp know their fatigue levels. Will be obviously chatting a lot about this later on our fan forum. And I think these will all be answered a lot more professionally than us three. But the book camp knows what their players are capable of, and they would have addressed individual performances and understood it if something was down to fatigue, that there probably something needed to be changed. Because I doubt that this team isn't now the starting lineup for the final if we get there.
Yeah, I suppose so. And yeah, it is tough because we've seen the exact same team out of here, so we're expecting almost the exact same strategy as well, hey guys. I mean, it's a bit of a tough one to read into, and one that we're not really not used to. This, of course, it seems that Rusty and Jacques always seem to have a different game plan, or at least a different personnel in mind for each game. I mean, so going into this week, we saw, of course, that Caden Moodie was included in press conferences and so on, and on media duty, and answering questions such as, "Are you ready for the semi-final?" And him going, "Yeah, very ready, very keen for it," all that kind of thing. I suppose that is really the extent of the mind games that have happened, either build up to the semi-final, perhaps, with Caden Moodie being maybe the outstanding missing puzzle piece, so to speak. You could have come in ready for Jesse, to give Jesse a bit of a break, who has been not really rested, to be very honest, much. And he's been end-to-end for quite a while now. And then, of course, Currie Arendse, the kind of questions that we posed to him was that, well, Currie is a bit shorter. We've heard this all before. Perhaps Currie isn't as good under the high ball, all this kind of nonsense. And we've seen that Caden Moodie does that very well. But my answer to that, as it was last time, is that Currie is phenomenal under the high ball, no matter what his height is. Him and Colby just do really well. But do you think there was mind games by the Springbok camp to send Caden Moodie out on media duty, and maybe sow that seed of doubt into that England lineup?
I think with Rassie, the interesting part is always innovative, creative in what he's doing. So I want to say yes. I took a look at the press conference where he was actually naming his proposed England team 23 for the match. So that's something you don't see every day, but it's definitely little percentages that would get into the back of the mind of England. For the most part, us naming our unchanged team, I don't think it was as a result of what England were going to put out. I think we always knew what our plan is, and that's the main thing. So we respect England. You can see with the lineup that we've picked unchanged, that we respect them, but we're going to focus on what we're doing. And then just coming to the Caden Moodie one, I think there was a big temptation to play him in this game. But at the same time, there'd be so many nuances. Would you play him then at 13? You would then pair up with Delende for the first time. If not, then you would have changed maybe Esterhuizen with Moodie, which is maybe a new combination. If you put him on the wing, do you bring in a Lucanio? I'm at 13 to give Jesse a rest. So I'm sure all those conversations were had. But I just think in terms of the playing minutes and the form that Jesse Kriel is in, it was hard to deny him the opportunity to have a real go. And then just looking ahead, I'm sure there might be one or two changes on the basis that we beat England for the final. But it's pretty much settled in the coaching staff's mind that this team will lift the trophy for the 4th time.
100%. Okay, so I'd like to get on to what is an incredibly controversial topic, and always is the subject of our discussions, unfortunately, but one that we have to talk about. And if you are in the comments, I do apologize. I am trying to get to as many of your comments as possible and get the guys' opinions on them. But please, if you could, let's have a focus quickly on the Manie Pollard discussion. of course, which for me is a massive one. There was a lot of talk that now that Pollard has got a bit of minutes under his belt, that he would possibly be taking over the throne, so to speak. Us at Forever Sports and many of us never thought that that was going to happen, and our opinion was actually that it shouldn't happen. Then that this dynamic where Andre plays the supporting role is the correct one. Dan, are we still of that view? Are we still in agreement that Manie has certainly earned his way to his position? In fact, I thought he looked phenomenal against France. Really, really good, and I think he's improving off the boot. Slightly, although we didn't get to see as much of it last time. But yeah, is it the right call?
100%. Like we said weeks ago in fan forums that the player was going to be Manie start, but once Pollard was fit enough, he was never going to be out of the 23. But what we wanted, we said Manie start, Pollard come on at more the 60 mark. The surprise was when he came on at the 45 mark and he was given a lot more game time. But I mean, you only need to look at the 3 points that he knocked over to, from 52 meters. I can't think of when last the Springboks hit a plus 50 meter, 3-pointer without him. And that's an incredible, just thing to have in your arsenal. If a team gives away a penalty this far away from the try line, we're still going to punish you. And we could have been saying he was the hero that won us the game if it weren't for Faf passing the ball into the French player who didn't need the ball passed into. There was a drop goal opportunity, and that would have really sealed the deal for us. In which case, everyone would have been, ultra Andre Pollard. But the try scored because of Manie's kicking and putting up that high ball, obviously a strategy and just to cause chaos with Peter Steff chasing it as well. It's working. He's getting the ball. It's, as you said, I think it was disrupted. He wasn't maybe getting it wide out of hand as much. But I think that was also partial to our game plan against the French. But he's looking as confident as ever. Play him until 45, 50 minutes, bring on Andre, close the game out, kick some crucial kicks. It's just, I feel like it's a perfect match made in heaven.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
You couldn't have asked for both players to come into such good form at the right time. Like, we needed a Manie to fill in a number 10 boot. We couldn't win a World Cup without a 10 playing well. And Manie's done that. He's played well. Yes, he's missed some kicks, but now 100 come at the perfect time where, we needed that 50-meter kick to beat the French. And that's so they're dovetailing incredibly well.
Yeah. And Ruud, something that I will say is that the one thing out of these two, and we saw in the week that Andre Pollard was asked a lot of questions about Manie Libbok, and he was so complimentary about him and his ability. And you could see that the faith, it's not put on, it's not for show. This man, who has been the Springbok incumbent flower for such a long time already, truly believes that Manie is the man to take them over the line. He's not competing against Manie. He is fully there to support him, and he showed a lot of faith in him. But I think what I find about the Springbok team so phenomenal is their ability to get behind each other, no matter what their position is in this team. Another example is, of course, Quacker Smith, who just can never break into a starting lineup, but seems to revel in that ability to come off the bench, even in tight situations, and really close the game out. And you can see on their faces they play as one, they play as a team, they play as a unit. On and off the pitch, they seem to be one. Isn't it phenomenal to see that when we've seen so much contention and even divisiveness amongst other teams, England in particular, if you haven't already seen some of the news coming out that the camp's not so happy. Isn't it great to see them getting behind one another?
Yeah, definitely. I think for England, they most certainly not in a place where we are, because the Springbok management team have harnessed or managed to nurture a real team environment that everybody understands their role, even if they're not in the playing 15, 23, that they're still part of the team no matter what, no less significant. Obviously, there are players that will be playing much more often. But the likes of Manie Libbok, if we take into consideration we've all had our critique of him in terms of his goal kicking. But I think in terms of his overall play, they talk about statistics, battle statistics. I know Kwagga Smith would come into mention there, being the highest Springbok player who's making the most impact on the field while he's there. But for Mani, we've only actually lost, as if I can remember, we've only lost one test. So it's 8 out of 9 that we've won with Mani Lebok at 10. So that must stand for something. I think the Springbok management and the players all involved know their role. So as I mentioned, England might not allow us to implement our game plans when we want, as per se, as efficiently, but there is a definite game plan around Mani, and then also a game plan around Pollard, and those two tie in seamlessly, and they're not opposing each other. Whereas England, I think there's a lot of perhaps maybe a bit of ego involved as to who wants to start. There was earlier in the World Cup, there was a scrap up between Arundel and Farrell, as I understand. And that sort of thing is not happening in the Springbok squad. We're just nurturing positivity, and that shows on the field.
100%. I'd like to go back to this comment here, Dan. It says, Safri Kiwi says, if it's playing, I play Pollard at 10. If dry, I play Mani. And I've had this conversation with someone actually a few minutes before the squad was announced, privately, but I actually don't really agree with that. I'm not really sure where this whole thing has come in, that for some reason Pollard plays better in the rain. Mani, a Western Cape boy who still plays in the Western Cape and has now elevated his game by also having taken to URC and playing in the Northern Hemisphere, and also that kind of wet environment. So the two are perhaps slightly different. And Pollard, who played his time in Pretoria and then is now in the Northern Hemisphere, and so he also has some experience there. But if you're going on purely the amount of time someone spent in horrendous conditions like that, surely Mani has to be the out-and-out leader in that department.
Yeah, I think definitely. I was also just thinking back, like having been a Western Cape boy, and then, since playing in the Stormers, it rains a hell of a lot during winter, and where a lot of the rugby is played. Pollard's obviously got the credentials of playing overseas, and probably does rain more here, but I don't think you change an entire team's game plan off of something that's not proven. Like, I don't think Mani's proven to play worse in the rain, and I don't think Pollard is proven to play much better. There might be one or two factors, but it's not really a topic of conversation that I think needs addressing and needs to have a big, you make a change like that, and now you're making a statement to the world, and now everyone's speaking about it, and now you're putting actually more pressure on both of them to perform in a different role to what they were speaking on. And even if word gets out about it being because of the rain and stuff like that, I think you're preparing for a scenario that isn't significant enough for it to, I think, make too much of a difference, particularly because we seem to be playing 55% Mani, 45% Polly for the entire game. So regardless, you're going to, have to face up to it at some point. And it seems like it's going to be pretty equal regardless.
Yeah, absolutely. So to move away again from that conversation, I think we've covered that combination quite well. Roots, I'd like to head back to the forwards, which is obviously your speciality, the big boy that you are. We've got Stephen Kitzel, Bongi Manami, and Francois Herber. Now, I'd like to go back to this Vincent Koch argument, because we've done it before against England, where we've had a very dominant set piece, particularly in scrums, and we know that if a team starts falling apart at scrum time, it's very hard for them to get back into the game at all. I'm surprised, to be honest, that they haven't gone with their strongest scrummaging pair off the bench, I should say, rather, because it would certainly be Trevor over Vincent if you're going purely on the scrummaging ability. And the scrummagers in this English side are no mugs by any means. Of course, we've got Carl Sinclair, Joe Marler, Dan Cole, Ellis Genge. These are all guys who can certainly hold their own. We're not going to steamroll them unless we really put forward our very strongest. Would you have liked to see Trevor maybe even get a start, or even a place on the bench?
Yeah, so for me, again, Trevor Nyakane is invaluable because of his ability to play on both sides of the scrum. He didn't get an opportunity in the last game, and he's never let the Springboks down, to be honest with you. I think perhaps just with this one, it's a case of combinations, and they feel, again, whether it's percentage stats or like I mentioned, battle stats, they're looking at all sorts of things. Jacques Nienaber is a very meticulous bloke when it comes to that sort of thing. And perhaps the oxen chair, Vincent Koch, coming off the bench as a combination then with a Dion Fourie works a little bit better than Trevor. I think maybe if you had, obviously Malcolm Marx is injured out of the tournament. If you had a Bongi and Banambi on the bench on the basis that Marx was starting, then that combination of the front row might have been influenced in favor of Trevor. But I think for the most part, Vincent Koch and Trevor Nyakane definitely on even par. And as I mentioned, with this whole squad, whether you're the 23 or the other 10 players, they'll never let the Springboks down. But we've got to get behind this squad and obviously don't discredit the role Trevor would be playing in the background, because he's obviously won a World Cup. He's quite a fun guy, keeps the spirits high in the side. So there's a role exactly for everyone, I'm sure.
100%. Okay, so Dan, we head to back towards, I suppose, our backline, a halfback situation. We see Peter Owenhouse says, Faf too slow in general, allows opposition, and then didn't quite finish his thought there. But a lot of the comments going on, I've just selected this one just because it sums up what I want to talk about. Kobus Reinach retains his spot in the starting lineup. Last week, quite frankly, we weren't entirely sure what the thinking was behind it, simply because they've stuck with Faf for so long in that position that it seemed almost unfathomable that he would lose his spot going into playoffs, right? From what you saw from his game last week, have you got any more insight into what you think they were trying to achieve with this Kobus Reinach starting?
I think it's come at a point where the Bok camp feels that with regard to as good of a tournament and just build up to this World Cup that Reinach's had, that he's actually earned his spot, and he's pretty much, on par with at a skill level with Faf. And obviously they have different ways of playing the number 9 jersey, right? Obviously
sorry, Dan, just before you continue their thoughts, Peter Owenhouse has finished his thought now. What he meant to say was Faf too slow in general allows opposition to counter-ruck. That is the thought. Okay, please continue.
Yeah, I was saying just, Faf obviously I think a lot better at the kicking game, whereas you have the ever opportunistic Reinach who's darting and making runs. But I think, both decent passes, and it's just the tempo of the game. And I think it's just what we are trying to bring out of this Bok team. The 23 or to be on the bench, to be starting, doesn't necessarily make you better or worse. Many would argue that, Kwagga Smith is one of our best players, but he's always on the bench. It doesn't mean he's worse than some of the other players. It just means that's his best position. So I think it's a shift to, we're going to try play a higher tempo for the first, 50 minutes of the game. And that's with Manie Libbok on the bench, starting, a bit more ball in hand, running at people or running at defenses and really trying to cause chaos, where it's going to slow down a lot more with Polly and Faf. And that's when we're going to use the high ball a little bit more and chase it. So I think it just comes in. He's become good enough to be that starting guy. And with how this Springbok team has evolved, I don't think they foresaw this. This wasn't a plan at the beginning of the World Cup, right? He played his way into a position where this was now an option for Jacques and Rassie to be able to select.
Okay, absolutely. And Riz, I see, of course, couple of questions there. Safri, let me answer you this first. Is it guaranteed rain for the game? It's looking that way, according to the forecast, Safri, but we've seen, it may just be overcast for the entire game. We honestly have no idea, but it's looking pretty positive that there will be rain during the game. Sorry, there was a comment I wanted to pull up here for you, Roots. There we go. Okay. Grant Swartz says, what will be interesting is when the bench will come on. Bongi surely can't go deep again. Roots, I'm just going to remove the comments so that you can also just see our bench. But our bench comprising, of course, Deon Fourie, Oxford Chair, Vincent Koch, Arcus Neyman, Kwak Smith, Faf de Klerk, Andre Pollard, and Billy Leroux. I suppose the focus is probably more on the forwards in that situation. But who do you expect to see make the most impact off the bench?
So from my side, again, we all mentioned Kwak Smith being that MVP player. We call it the bench, but I know Rassie and Jacques and them refer to them as starters and finishers. And as a finisher, the impact that he has is I don't think many players actually come close. And then the likes of obviously Deon Fourie coming off the bench adds another dynamic. They will have discussed, I'm sure, at what stage Bongi Bonambi will be coming off. He had a high work rate last week. I mean, there were a number of players who were
70 minutes is insane for
a couple of absolutely. A couple of players who were in contention for man of the match there, but just the likes of obviously then Deon Fourie, Oxenchair, Vincent Koch, to set that platform at the set piece scrum to absolutely dominate them and throw them out the water. So as Dan was mentioning, the first half, we're definitely going to play with ball in hand, but just looking at the bench, then it's like we're going to constrict them in that second half. You look at Faf de Klerk, Andre Pollard, both very good defenders, not throwing Kobus and Mani under the bus, but in terms of game management and defense, Faf de Klerk, Pollard, very important in those first channels. And then it's just the likes of RG Snyman, who's the physical presence, but then he's also got the skill of a Sonny Bill Williams. So there's quite a few different dynamics that I think the Springbok management have put together in the finishing 8 players that they'll be able to then manage the game to what we want to do and then not react on what England are doing.
Absolutely. Guys, as we close out this session of the fan panel, this live reaction show, a reminder that we do have our weekly fan forum this evening starting at 7 o'clock. We will be discussing all of the intricacies of what happened this past weekend, where we can talk about things like this HIA scandal, so to speak, that's been going around, and of course look ahead, the in-depth analysis for this weekend's semi-final. This is just an analysis of our starting lineup. We of course have a very special guest tonight in the Lions head of medical in Pamela Watts, who will be joining us this evening on the show. Please do pose all your questions to her relating to that field. She will have so much insight into this fatigue questions, the rotation policy, how much these injuries actually affect players, and also team culture, things that us as pundits and as viewers don't often get answered, and also as well as their integration between the Lions, or not even Lions, but just provincial teams and these SF teams, and how they help them prepare for these tournaments, which is going to be absolutely amazing. Safri Currie says, how long until that fan show? That'll be 7 p.m. South African time. Okay, it is scheduled. You can find the link to the video. It's already up on the channel. So let's just see here, Dan, if there's anything else that you want to cover for today. I'm not too sure that we do have much more to talk about, to be very honest. So I will end off by simply just asking the very simple question is, if there was a change, one change in particular that you would have liked to have seen to the starting lineup, what would it have been? And can this current starting lineup do the job in the semi-finals?
I just quickly want to touch on an earlier point made about, I think, Bongi's emptying the tank. I think, and then I'll come into this just quickly. I think that the reason they did that, the margin for error was so small in that French game. And this, again, not to disrespect England, because I think it's going to be equally tough, but I don't think nearly as physical. You needed an enforcer like Bongi to be on there, a specialist number 2 for as long, because we know the French were going to try and batter us up front, and they had the pack to do that, and they came with a 6-2. So I think that was kind of the reason. I don't see Bongi, even if we get to the final, playing necessarily 70 minutes again. I think it'll be more of a 55-60. Then to go on to, I think, one player to change. For me, unfortunately, and I've been a long supporter of him, but I think I would have liked to have seen a 6-2, and I would have liked to see old Eskom Marco van Staden come in, or Jasper Wiese to relieve some of the legs of Dwayne Vermeulen. That would have been it. Yeah, that would have been it for me. I think also just based on the fact that, again, he didn't have, I think, more than 10 minutes. Maybe 15, and it didn't feel like a major impact when he came off, and Willems has been playing out of his socks and has shown that he can play the full 80.
A quick word on what you mentioned about that 6-2 split, and so a thought that just popped into my head is that I wonder what the psyche is of opposition teams now when they see South Africa revert to a 5-3 against them, because in my head, I mean, these are professionals. They probably don't think like I do, but I would say to them, oh, that's almost disrespectful in a way, right? Because we've seen before, of course, the 7-1 and the 6-2 is basically saying to us, we respect you so much physically that we're going to stack this bench with just absolute powerhouses in order to overcome you, right? Now, when you revert to this 5-3, it's almost as if we're saying to England, we don't actually need that much power to do the job over you, right? Is that am I being ridiculous, or is that quite a? I actually think that's probably a thought that's maybe I think creep into the minds a little bit and go, oh, well, you don't actually respect us physically that much.
I don't know if it's the physicality that we don't respect. I think it I don't know. For me, it more felt that this is our biggest strength, and now we're going to use it to the most of our ability, but now we've actually grown in other parts of our game, and that feels like it's almost been unlocked with the coming Mani Liebach, and it's allowed us to kind of start playing a different way, and we've seen options in that. But I think definitely, the French would have been, incredibly shocked, as we all were. We hadn't seen that in forever. But yeah, Ruud, sorry if I interrupted and I stole your question, but yeah.
No. I was directed to you. Grant Schwartz says the further away from the 23 Jasper Wiese is, the better. He is a Lions player at best. Ouch. Yeah, that's quite hurtful as the Lions. But at the same time, I actually think
the British and Irish Lions.
Yeah, I would say that's actually probably just maybe a bit disrespectful to Jasper Wiese, because my poor Lions are not looking very good at the moment. So yeah, regardless of what you think of it, he's probably far too good for my Lions side. Ruud, the same question goes to you. If there was one player that you would have changed from the starting lineup, who would it be? And can this team do the job against this England lineup?
To be honest with you, the only player, if I could have in the Springbok team, would actually be Rassie himself. So if he could warm up and do a couple of stretches, I think he'd add even more value on the field, because he's just about on the field. He's got all these innovative communication techniques that he's using. But I think just from my side, I just want to remind the English, we do obviously respect them as the only unbeaten team in the Northern Hemisphere. But I just want to remind them that South Africans, we both eat pap, I'm sure, but we eat pap and vleis for breakfast, and they eat Cocoa Pops for breakfast, and that's going to be the difference. Our energy doesn't thrive on maybe scones and tea. Our energy thrives off that pure grit of vleis manure, and that sustained energy is just going to be enough to bend, buckle, and break their spirits, and I'm very confident of that. So I want South Africa to be confident with us all that the English, we're not going to necessarily just do things the way we want to do, but they need to be reminded that they need to be on full tilt and look into the eyes of people that are really hungry to bring that fourth title home.
Absolutely. Having said all of that, we are, of course, backing the boys all the way. We look forward to a good game. I do think that the English do need to be given perhaps a little more respect than has been shown lately. I think that this is playoff time. They've earned their way into the semi-final. They will be up for it. There is no givens in playoff rugby, as the Irish have found out, of course, as well as the French. There are no givens. You can be 24 games unbeaten and come up against any team in the world and lose on your day. It's just how it goes. But guys, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for engaging with us every week. We really do appreciate it. We recently hit that 50,000 mark, and now we've well cleared it with 52,500. So please do continue to like and subscribe to this channel. We've endeavored to bring you the very best content all the time and make sure that you are entertained and have all the news for your favorite Springboks and other rugby teams around the world. Thank you again for all your time. Thank you to our sponsors in BOYLESPORTS and BITDEFENDER. Thank you to my panel in Rudes and Daniel Scholz. It is always a pleasure to have you. I will allow you to continue with your Thursday wherever you are around the world, and I hope that you have a fantastic day. From all of us here at Forever Sports, until next time, ciao for now.